but Qatar is still receiving visitors months after. Qatar Tourism says the country has welcomed more than 2 million tourists so far this year, thanks to its strategic location with a free visa to more than 100 countries and hosting a series of international events. After spending billions of dollars on its infrastructure for the FIFA World Cup last year, experts say now is the time for Qatar to cash in.
What Qatar is doing is very much showcasing its own unique values and its unique offer. And there is a strong sporting legacy with Formula One, now with the FIFA World Cup, and that's been carried through into the Asian Games as well. So you can see that they're very much trying to ensure that the legacy continues.
The Football World Cup has reinvigorated an economy battered by the pandemic. The country hosted more than 1 million visitors during the tournament, and many also travelled to neighbouring countries. Some Gulf Cooperation Council member countries are planning a common visa, similar to the Schengen, that would allow visitors to move freely across the region. Analysts say the GCC stands to benefit from cross-border cooperation and not competition.
The offer of Schengen visa to visitors would truly be a game changer for the GCC region. Instead of sort of being competitors, destinations would be working and collaborating together to ensure that visitors can, go from one country to another and that everybody benefits from tourism.
The Arab Ministerial Council for Tourism has named Doha the Arab tourism capital this year. Qatar's vision for its future is also in line. With the United Nations Sustainable Goals for 2030. It hopes to draw 6 million visitors a year during this year and increase tourism's contribution to its GDP from 7 to 12%. FIFA World Cup off its checklist, and the billions spent on it have gone into infrastructure projects that come handy on what's next. Qatar's Vision 2030, as it focuses on diversifying its economy and income sources. Kulsum Sharif, Doha, for Counting the Cost.
Now let's have a look at some GCC and Qatar tourism numbers. According to Euromonitor's travel forecast model, international arrivals to the GCC region this year are expected to exceed their 2019 levels. Arrivals are forecast to reach 53 million visitors with a spending capacity of $114 billion. Tourism in Qatar received a boost from hosting the FIFA World Cup with international arrivals of 2.1 million in 2022. Well, these visitors spent around $10.8 billion during their stay in the country. To find out more about the booming tourism sector in Qatar, Kulsum Sharif sat down with Qatar's Tourism Authority Chief Operating Officer Berthold Trenkel. She began by asking him how Qatar plans to keep the momentum of tourists after the World Cup.
For us, obviously, it was a huge milestone as a country. For tourism, it also unleashed the development. If you think about the infrastructure that was ready, whether it's expansion of the airport, the new cruise terminal that came in, and then, of course, over public transportation. We also saw an immense growth in the hotel sector. Room capacity went up by nearly 40% in a very, very short period. So for us to keep the momentum is just to capitalize on the gain in reputation that obviously the destination got. We have much more interest when it comes to talking to tour operators and travel agencies around the world that previously were hesitant to sell or even to offer Qatar, and they're all now interested to put us, so to speak, if you want, on the shelf.
Well, Qatar is against some very established tourist destinations within the region. You have Saudi with the religious tourism, you have Abu Dhabi with all the bling. Does Qatar take the sporting destination?
We have a reputation to defend, if you want, as their sports events destination, and there's a lot more that will be added to that. But the second thing is we're really now pushing, I don't know if you've seen the news, that coming February we'll have the Web Summit come to this part of the world, and we'll be the first Web Summit in the Middle region. So for us to expand kind of the MICE sector is another important thing. And then when it comes to competition, there's space for everyone. Everyone is in a slightly different position and is targeting different segments. For Qatar, we want to win first and foremost as a family-friendly destination, which is actually quite different from the other destinations you've just mentioned. I think there's enough space.
I'm given to understand there is the GCC nations are mooting for like a common visa. Will that be beneficial?
So you have two elements here. One, for us, much more important was that the HEA program, which was, again, a product of the FIFA World Cup, will continue and is now in play as the e-visa for Qatar. But let's not forget, we already have 100 countries that are visa-free, and that makes us the most open country in this region. So for the others to come now with a GCC, if you want, coordinated visa, will just mean catch up for them, but we will continue to go ahead and will welcome more and more visitors from more and more countries than everyone else.
You're offering visa-free entry for people from more than 90 countries, and as you said, you want Qatar to be a family destination, but is there a tourist profile? Like, are you welcoming the person seeking luxury, or you're open to the average globetrotter?
So obviously, tourism for Qatar and for Qatar Tourism is not just a numbers game, as in maximizing the number of visitors, but it's more around we're looking for above average spend. Yes, that will include luxury, which then perfectly matches the portfolio of hotels that we have. Family is demographics. But if you think about different families, a family from Europe, UK, France, Germany, they're probably coming here to experience the desert, so they're looking for adventure, or they're looking in winter especially for sun, sea, and sand. Someone coming from India, they have a slightly different interest. They're probably more into shopping, indoor experiences.
You have 2 million visitors so far this year, and you say that's pretty good going. But are the investors following? And what's in it for an investor?
So first, it's about satisfying the current investors. We've seen literally billions of reals being invested over the last 5 years into all the infrastructure that tourism has. So delivering returns for the existing investors is for us at the moment the number one priority, rather than looking for additional investments and expanding the capacity.
The tourism sector is often facing criticism for not being sustainable enough. What does Qatar have to offer on that front?
So there's two strategic objectives that we have there. One, you mentioned sustainability. Sustainability for me at the highest level starts with things like zero plastic, minimizing food waste, and then of course in this region very, very important is also energy saving, as in managing your electricity, which is linked because of the summer temperatures to the air conditioning use. So we have different initiatives where we're working with the hotels trying to optimize these three goals. Now that's sustainability. I want to add one more that we're also adding to the agenda here, which is often overlooked: accessibility. We are also launching a program to work with the hotels to make Qatar, and specifically all the properties and also the major attractions in Doha, very good when it comes to accessibility.
And finally, do you see yourself achieving the Vision 2030 goals for Qatar?
I think we're well underway. You mentioned that we've already achieved the 2 million mark, and this was only the half year. So I don't want to now say double the number for the year, but I think we're on a good trajectory towards hitting the 6 to 7 million goal. But now it is about converting this into equal commercial success. And that's why it's not just a numbers game of visitors. It's also a game of room nights. It's a game of in-destination spend. And that's why you asked, like, what type of profile of tourists do we want? It is winning against the right profile and attracting the right profile. So it's a much more complicated game. But I think overall, all indicators post-FIFA World Cup are pointing in the right direction.
Make it stylish, make it modern, but make it modest. The so-called modest fashion revolution has gained global appeal since it first emerged in the 2000s. Social media and online retail have given it a major push. But what is modest fashion? Well, essentially, it describes a way of dressing for women who want to implement modesty regardless of their faith or culture. According to the 2022 State of the Global Islamic Economy report, modest fashion was valued at $277 billion, and it's estimated to reach $311 billion by 2024. Spending on modest fashion increased in the key markets of Turkey, Malaysia, Pakistan, and the Middle East. But it's also growing in the UK and USA. More and more Western fashion giants and luxury top brands are embracing this sector as it moves from niche to mainstream. Well, from the city of Granada in Spain's Andalusia region, I'm joined now by Alia Khan. Alia is the founder and chairwoman of the London-based Islamic Fashion and Design Council organization. Good to have you with us, Alia. So why
How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Why has modest fashion become such a big business? Is it becoming mainstream?
I think it is becoming mainstream only because you're seeing the mainstream really embrace it in the way that they are, which is nicely surprising for us, actually. What was wonderful was in the early days, we saw DKNY do her Ramadan collection. We saw Dolce & Gabbana come out with their hijab and their abaya line. So all these big names, Victoria Beckham was coming up with ways to cover the head that matched the dress. So all this was an ode to us, wasn't it? And so then, of course, when that happens, then you see Hollywood following suit. And before you know it, you see it on the red carpet. And that's how it becomes popular for everyone.
All right, not only the red carpet, but TikTok. Over 2 billion views on TikTok for hashtag modest fashion. Have influencers, social media, they've been the driving force for this market?
You know, social media kind of liberated us, if you will. Social media allowed us to communicate to each other on what we felt was elegant and what we felt was stylish and what we wanted in our fashion world. So you saw influencers coming up with hijab tutorials. You saw style influencers talking about how to put things together and still be modest. So they gave this level of not only credibility, but sort of an elevation to the whole idea of dressing modestly and how beautiful it can be. So yeah, social media just moved worlds for this market.
All right, as the big brands come in, as you're mentioning, is that also making it, though, more expensive to dress modestly, which, you know, is kind of ironic, I guess, to the whole principle?
Well, I mean, I think they're in tune to the fact that we are the most affluent demographic in the world. Just by numbers, we have the highest spending power. For fashion alone, it's in the hundreds of billions. So that's attractive to any brand, naturally. And I think they're, of course, tuning their work to that spending power. So yes, you will see those types of price tags, but that doesn't mean that it only has to be expensive. We do have choices. If you go to the high street, you'll find a lot of options. If you go to some of the sort of like the lower cost stores, you'll find wonderful options. So you can mix and match and meet your budget no matter where that is.
I assume there's still room for growth. Break down the projections for us and any challenges. You know, what's holding things back? More investment, more marketing?
Yeah, investment is a big one. I think for any brand, it doesn't matter whether you're in the mainstream or in the modest market. I think just investment in general is what's holding a lot of the brands back, holding a lot of extremely talented creatives from really coming to market as they should. So that's a huge one. But we're also seeing a lot of changes, Sammy. We're seeing huge changes in the world. So those that are catering to this market need to understand what works for this market and what buzzwords will likely turn this market off. So, with the new ideologies and the new movements, there has to be a stop and pause on how this might also repel a huge market.
Fantastic. It's been great talking to you. Love the discussion. Thank you so much, Alia.
Thanks, Sammy.
And that's our show for this week. But remember, you can get in touch with us via Twitter. Use the hashtag AJCTC when you do, or drop us an email. countingthecost@aljazeera.net is our address. There's more for you online at aljazeera.com/CTC. That'll take you straight to our page, which has individual reports, links, and entire episodes for you to catch up on. That's it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Sami Zaidan from the whole team here. Thanks for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.
The most endangered marine mammal in the world. The vaquita, the planet's smallest porpoise. There are only between 10 and 13 left. The Navy and the seahorse are patrolling the waters to try and save them. In May, they've had some good news. A survey showed the vaquita's numbers had stayed stable. The pause in the vaquita's decline is credited mainly to the Mexican Navy putting down a maze of concrete blocks with hooks to snag any gill nets in the no fishing zone. 10 to 13 vaquitas doesn't sound like a lot, but most people expected it to be wiped out altogether by now, and it's a big deal that it's so far escaped extinction.
Hi, I'm Cyril Vanier. It's good to have you with us. This is the News Hour, live from Doha. Coming up in the next 60 minutes, starvation, death, and suffering for millions. That's the warning from the UN after the breakdown of the Black Sea grain deal. Campaigning wraps up in Spain ahead of Sunday's snap election, which could see the far-right gain ground for the first time in decades. Greece's hottest July in 50 years stokes devastating wildfires, which are proving difficult to contain. And the White House announces 7 leading AI companies are committing to safeguards on their products. We'll find out what that means later in the show.
In sport, it's a perfect start for Lionel Messi as he makes his debut for Inter Miami.
Messi!
A 94th minute free kick giving his new team victory over Cruz Azul. All the action coming up later in the programme.
It's just past 10 GMT, and we start this news hour with the conflict in Ukraine. The United Nations humanitarian chief says the end of the Black Sea grain deal will put millions of lives at risk. Russia withdrew from the agreement on Monday, saying that the UN didn't meet terms of the deal, including removing barriers on Russia's exports. Moscow came under pressure during a Security Council meeting on Friday to discuss the threat of a potential global food crisis. Since August last year, this deal has allowed 32 million tons of Ukrainian grain to reach international markets. Our diplomatic editor, James Bays, reports from UN headquarters in New York.
This was the second meeting of the UN Security Council in 1 week to address the termination of the Black Sea grain deal, and there were strong comments from both the political and the humanitarian chiefs of the UN.
But for many of those 362 million people, it's not a matter of sadness or disappointment. It's a matter of threat to their future and the future of their children and their families. They're not sad, they're angry, they're worried, they're concerned. Some will go hungry, some will starve, many may die as a result of these decisions.
The events of the past week about the latest developments in the Russian Federation's senseless war against its neighbor, a war with consequences that can be felt around the world. Russia's termination of its participation in the Black Sea Initiative, coupled with its bombardment of crucial ports, will further compound this crisis.
Russia has set out a series of 7 conditions that it says has to be met before the deal can be restored, and UN officials tell me that that is a very high bar that probably can't be met. The Ukrainians, meanwhile, say they have plans which they're discussing privately with Western countries for a new route from Odessa to Romania, hugging the Ukrainian coast. UN officials tell me that that is unlikely to work because no company would want to risk its vessels when Russia says anything travelling that route would be a target. James Bays, Al Jazeera, at the United Nations.
A former Russian intelligence officer turned vocal critic of Vladimir Putin is facing up to 5 years in prison on charges of inciting extremism. Dmitry Medvedenko has more.
From the face of the Donbass uprising to the image of the Kremlin's continued crackdown on critics of the special military operation in Ukraine, Igor Strelkov, real name Girkin, was considered untouchable until recently. It all changed after Wagner Group's failed mutiny in June exposed just how big a threat a former high-ranking figure can be.
These are people with weapons and connected to people with weapons. And so apparently the order came from the Kremlin, from the presidential administration, to crack down, beginning with Mr. Strelkov Girkin, who has been a vocal critic for quite some time.
Strelkov became one of the first people placed on a list of Western sanctions against Russians. This happened after the downing of Malaysia Airlines flight MH17 in July 2014 by a missile over eastern Ukraine. Last year, Strelkov was sentenced to life in absentia by a Dutch court for his alleged involvement as one of the commanders of the local militia. Strelkov's supporters gathered outside a Moscow court calling for his release. He has around 1 million followers on social media. When Strelkov lost his leadership role in eastern Ukraine, he became a harsh critic not just of the military but of Putin as well. He called his recently formed opposition movement the Club of Angry Patriots. And his supporters believe he is one.
This is completely unlawful in my point of view. Now, when the situation develops in a very dramatic way, after the mutiny, when the economic situation started to change, detaining people who support the state, who support the battlefront, is suicidal.
For almost a decade, Ukrainians have been calling for Igor Strelkov's arrest. But few believed it would be Igor's former colleagues from the Federal Security Service who would arrest him. Dmitry Medvedenko, Al Jazeera.
Greece is facing what could be its hottest July weekend in nearly 50 years, with temperatures expected to soar to 45 degrees Celsius. The heat, combined with strong winds, have caused wildfires near the capital, Athens. At least 100 homes have been destroyed. Stephanie Decker reports from Mandra on the outskirts of Athens.
Around 35 square kilometres of lush green forested woodland outside the capital, Athens, has been burnt in these wildfires, completely destroyed, and the ground remains smouldering, and this is a real concern that the winds will start to reignite these flames. And that's also something the residents here are telling us are extremely worried about. They were evacuated over the last couple of days, now on Friday allowed to return, but for them this is still not over.
For sure we are afraid. It's not over yet. As you can see behind you, there's smoke. Rekindling has started.
We're seeing helicopters arrive here every 10 minutes now, refilling their bellies with water and heading back out into these areas, wooded areas around the capital. This is the concern. When the winds pick up, it's so easy to reignite the flames. Not just the Greeks are here, but also foreign help from Italy, from Spain, from Malta and other countries, making it really a real communal effort to try and fight these ongoing wildfires. Stephanie Decker, Al Jazeera, on the outskirts of Athens.
The extreme heat is also affecting people in Lebanon and the surrounding regions. Many Syrians living in refugee camps in the north of Lebanon are struggling to cope. Victoria Gatenby reports.
Makeshift showers are the only escape from the sweltering heat for these children living in a refugee camp in Akkar in northern Lebanon. Temperatures here have reached 42 degrees Celsius in recent days.
The heat has been brutal. We have no electricity, no fans. That's why we came up with this idea of getting plastic bags, filling them with water and have them sprinkle the water on the kids so they can cool off and have fun too.
But at this camp, like many others back home in Syria, there's not enough water. It's partly because of reduced support from donor organisations.